The future is nuclear, or at least that's what some headlines might say, but is it actually true? I mean, after all, as of mid-2025, 408 reactors were operating worldwide, the same number as a year earlier, and 30 below the 2002 peak of 438. But first, what exactly even is nuclear energy? What are we talking about here? Well, nuclear energy works through nuclear fission, and fission occurs when a neutron slams into a larger atom, forcing it to excite and split into two smaller atoms, also known as fission products. Additional neutrons are also released that can initiate a chain reaction. When each atom splits, a tremendous amount of energy is released. Uranium and plutonium are most commonly used for fission reactions in nuclear power reactors because they are easy to initiate and control. The energy released by fission in these reactors heats water into steam. The steam is used to spin a turbine to produce carbon-free electricity. And I'd say carbon-free electricity sounds pretty good, so maybe the future should be nuclear. But the number of countries building power reactors has fallen sharply from 16 in mid-2023 to 13 in mid-2024 and just 11 in mid-2025. Only 4 countries, China, India, Russia, and South Korea, have construction ongoing at more than one site. So maybe instead of the future is nuclear, what should be actually said is the future is unclear. But why exactly? Fun fact, only 56% of adults in the United States support the idea of more nuclear power plants, which is only 17% more than the support for coal mining. If we look specifically at Republicans, support for coal mining and support for nuclear power is basically the same. And for context, between 1992 and 2002, surface coal mining in Appalachia has damaged or destroyed more than 1,200 miles of streams and deforested some 380,000 acres, with valley fills covering more than 83,000 acres and affecting the drainage of some 438,000 acres of watershed. Coal mining clearly does have its negative effects on the environment. I think we all know that at this point. But nuclear power doesn't involve anything like coal mining, right? Okay, fine. Uranium mining does exist, but fortunately it's not so bad compared to coal mining. In the US, in situ leaching is the most common uranium mining method, which is less costly and less environmentally disruptive than other methods of uranium mining. This method produces no waste rock, and no surface or underground removal of rock is necessary. So pretty good, but although it may be better for the environment than coal mining, it does have a unique problem. And that's, of course, radiation. Internal exposure to radioactive materials during uranium mining and processing can take place through inhalation, ingestion, or absorption through an open cut or wound. External radiation exposure from beta particles or gamma rays can also present a health risk. Okay, but I mean, surely nuclear energy and coal don't have anything more in common. Like, for example, coal mining generates large quantities of waste. One significant form of waste is the sludge that is produced from washing coal. In some locations, sludge is contained in impoundments, which can pose a threat to human life and the environment if they fail. And surely nuclear power doesn't have anything like waste that would be dangerous if not properly contained. Yeah, no, I think we all knew where I was going with that. Obviously, nuclear waste does exist, and it's a major concern. The hazardous waste contains highly poisonous chemicals, like plutonium and uranium pellets. These extremely toxic materials remain highly radioactive for tens of thousands of years, posing a threat to agricultural land, fishing waters, freshwater sources, and humans. For this reason, it is crucial that they are meticulously and permanently disposed of. Alright, so 2 major challenges have now been identified that should be overcome when it comes to using nuclear energy. But that's not to say that these problems don't already have decent solutions. For example, in situ leaching was already mentioned as a cheaper and more environmentally friendly way of mining uranium. And of course, regulations do already exist to help keep uranium miners safe. And regarding nuclear waste, I mean, we do store it somehow, because after all, more than 250,000 tons of highly toxic nuclear waste have been accumulated and spread across 14 countries worldwide. In most cases, the highly radioactive material is collected and stored in inactive nuclear power plants. And what I'm about to say wouldn't exactly hold up firmly in court to prove that nuclear waste management is effective, but I mean, last I checked, we aren't exactly living in a nuclear wasteland. So, at least there's that, I guess. But anyways, I'm also not saying that the current solutions are perfect. I mean, nothing can be perfect, of course. But what I mean is, there are certain countries that have better solutions and precautions taken to these problems than the general rest of the nuclear energy space. Solutions and precautions that perhaps should be spread to countries like the US, and just overall the rest of the world. So let's start by looking at uranium mining management. You see, the International Commission for Radiological Protection, or the ICRP, has established recommended standards for protection, both for members of the public and radiation workers, but certain countries have taken further steps to help secure safety. Australian and Canadian radiation safety regulations today are among the most comprehensive and stringent in the world. If we look to Canada specifically, we find the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or CNSC. An example of an area the CNSC regulates is radon exposure in uranium mines and mills. The CNSC requires licensees have engineering design and control processes to remove radon to limit exposure to workers. Radon is naturally produced by the decay of uranium and is released into the air when uranium ore is mined and milled. Radon gas produced during mining and milling is continuously monitored, controlled, and safely ventilated away from the workers. Worker exposures to radon in the uranium mining and processing industry are as low as, or only slightly greater than, public exposure from natural radon. And Canada having some of the most comprehensive regulations does make sense, because actually, Canada is one of the world's largest uranium producers and most of Canada's production is exported. So if other countries are relying on you for something, I'd imagine you'd take steps to not tear yourself apart in the process. Additionally, with the licensing process for uranium mines, the CNSC determines at each licensing stage whether the license applicant is qualified. The Commission determines if the license applicant has made adequate provisions for the protection of health and safety of people and environment. Applicants must also demonstrate the required measures to maintain national security and apply Canada's international obligations for the peaceful use of nuclear energy. Pushing Canada's level of safety onto all countries that deal with large amounts of uranium mining would reasonably make the process a lot safer, not just for everything, but also for everyone. And making this something that is required really would be a big change, because if you have a keen ear, you might have heard earlier when I said that the International Commission for Radiological Protection establishes recommended standards. Alright, so now what about nuclear waste? I'd say that nuclear waste is arguably the more popular issue when it comes to nuclear energy. And having a good solution to the problem is important not just for the sake of having that good solution, but also to improve public perception. And as it turns out, there is in fact a better solution than storing nuclear waste at inactive power plants. One of the best solutions so far seems to be to bury nuclear waste underground, and about a dozen European countries have already made plans for deep geological repositories for their spent fuel. However, their plans have hit political roadblocks. But one country is showing a lot of promise, and that country is Finland. In 2004, works began encapsulating waste inside copper canisters, which were buried in 400 to 450 meter deep underground tunnels. Now, Finland is close to completing the world's first long-term nuclear waste disposal site, which is expected to be operational in 2023. So it should be operational now, right? Well, actually, no, it's not operational yet, but now the repository could begin receiving spent nuclear fuel as early as late 2026 or early 2027. So they may have kicked the copper canister down the road a little bit, but they are getting there. There's a chance that it could begin pretty shortly after this video is created, and is ideally going to outlive us more than 1,000 times over. Because apparently, the facility is designed to safely isolate radioactive material for at least 100,000 years. That means that the Bible has only existed for 3% of the time that this repository is planned to last for. And let's actually back up a bit, because there's another comparison that can be made here. This repository is meant to be 400 to 450 meters underground, and for any space exploration nerds, that's about 4 Saturn V rockets deep. And if you're not a space exploration nerd, just know that the Saturn V rocket is taller than the Statue of Liberty from the ground to the top. But okay, how exactly does this solution even work? I mean, you bury the waste underground, but how does that actually solve anything? How does that protect the radiation from just spreading to the ground? And of course, these questions do have answers. And with these answers, and tons of reference images, I made a Blender animation to go with it. The repository is designed to eventually store up to 6,500 tons of spent nuclear fuel generated by Finland's 5 operating reactors. The waste will first be sealed inside corrosion-resistant copper canisters before being lowered into disposal holes drilled directly into the bedrock. Each canister will then be surrounded by bentonite clay, which acts as an additional protective barrier against water infiltration and radioactive release. Once disposal tunnels are filled, they will be sealed with reinforced concrete structures. Basically, the radiation is prevented from going anywhere. The plan is for that to happen as long as the waste is radioactive, hence why the repository is meant to exist for 100,000 years. Obviously, this Blender model, it doesn't actually simulate the radiation and the repository's capacity to contain it, so I can't prove that the solution works with this model alone. But it does still function visually as a way to present the solution that is already in motion. Naturally, the solution itself isn't perfect. In Finland, some local residents and scientists have raised concerns over long-term risks, including corrosion of copper canisters. But if Finland does find a success in this solution, then it's pretty reasonable to assume that this solution will also spread. It's also not like Finland is the only place pursuing this solution. Sweden has received the necessary environmental permits for a repository that will store 12,000 metric tons of waste beneath 60 kilometers of tunnel at a depth of 500 meters. Construction is expected to begin within a decade, and could take until the 2080s to complete. That was a lot. So, is the future nuclear? Well, maybe. If the future is nuclear, then perhaps strict international regulations around uranium mining should be established, similar to the regulations seen in Canada. And if the future is nuclear, then perhaps nuclear waste should be securely buried in many layers of protection, as seen in Finland's near future. But we don't know if the future is nuclear because the future is unclear. And if the future is not nuclear, then let's just hope the future is cool and not coal.